You're listening to Nostalgia Club, the podcast where we look back on our favorite childhood stories and revisit them as adults. At least one of us hasn't read or watched these series, so we also get a first-timer's opinion. Spoiler alert, we will be discussing storylines and future events beyond the first books and episodes, so proceed with caution. Hello, and welcome back to Nostalgia Club, your favorite weekly podcast. I'm Victoria, and I'm joined by...
Michael.
And Jino.
Hooray! Today we're talking about Matilda. I've already forgotten the year this book came out.
2012. No.
2012.
1988.
Roald Dahl writing from beyond the grave.
Oh no. A 1988 novel following the story of a young girl named Matilda who is extremely smart. She's only 5 years old, but she's read all of the books that her library has to provide. And then she goes to school, to this horrible, horrible school, which is...
Crunchem Academy?
Yeah, Crunchem Academy.
I missed that part.
Yeah.
That's a great name for a school.
And the headmaster is named Miss Trunchbull. And it's a lovely tale of abuse.
And fighting the power with your magic abilities?
Yeah.
With your magic eyes.
Your telekinetic powers?
But we'll get all into the plot summary later. But first, let's get a vibe check. Just for context, I read the book, I think a couple of times for sure as a kid, because I still remember it very vividly. I also recently watched the movie adaptation of the musical, which was also an adaptation of the book. So multiple layers of adaptation there. I unfortunately didn't have time to watch the original movie adaptation with Mara Wilson and Danny DeVito, but I'm excited to watch it at some point. Michael, what was your experience with Matilda?
My experience with Matilda, to my knowledge, was just the movie adaptation that Victoria missed. It was also directed by Danny DeVito, apparently, which is...
That's awesome.
Isn't that something?
I love it when Danny DeVito.
Whenever Danny DeVito, it's great.
It's great.
So reading this book, I think, unless I'm misremembering something from long in my past, was my first time interacting with it. And then I rewatched the Danny DeVito directed movie, and boy, it holds up.
Nice.
Oh, it holds up.
I'm really excited to get your thoughts on the movie.
I'm excited to get your thoughts on the movie musical based on the book. What was your experience, Gino?
I thought I hadn't read Matilda, but as I was reading it in preparation for this recording, I recognized a lot of the pictures. So I must have, at the very least, as a young child, leafed through it, although the plot sort of surprised me. However, I did watch the Broadway production live, which is a really, really cool experience. I've never been able to do anything like that again.
Wow.
And it was incredible. And it was also, I think, fairly different. Not like dramatically different. They were both very good stories, but I was perhaps surprised by the original material and the choices they made in the musical.
I'm excited because I'm also curious how it changed from the original Broadway musical to the movie adaptation that they did.
I've heard it's a fairly faithful adaptation of an adaptation.
The songs are fun.
But we will mostly be talking about the book because that's the one thing that we all share here.
Yeah, I'm excited because the three of us cover all our bases in terms of adaptations.
We've all seen one of them.
Yeah.
We definitely won't get confused.
Yeah. So, Gino, we've talked a lot about the various Matilda adaptations, but if someone wants to learn more about these, where should they go?
Well, you should consider Adapt or Die. Pippa and KJ dive deep into what makes an adaptation work, the history behind them, and the people who create them. They've covered all sorts of stories and spin-offs, like Little Women. I'd say Matilda is the littlest woman, because she's 5, and very small.
Did it adapt or did it die? Listen to Adapt or Die on all podcast platforms and on Patreon.
So I guess a quick plot summary. As we said earlier, there's a young girl named Matilda. She's 5 years old. Her family is very different from her. There's Mr. Wormwood, who is a car salesman and not a very honest one at that. There's Mrs. Wormwood, who is kind of a stay-at-home mom, but she mostly goes out and plays bingo with her friends, and then she comes home and she cooks TV dinners for the family, and they sit in front of the TV, and that's their entertainment for the day.
Hell yeah, what a life.
Yeah, I totally don't do that as an adult now.
Yeah, Victoria, always going to those bingo games when you should be working? I'm really thinking it's starting to be a problem.
Don't talk about that on the podcast. No, I'm kidding. Matilda also has a brother forget his name because he's not very important.
He's just kind of there.
He's just kind of there.
This poor kid just dragged along through the plot with no opinions or personality.
He's literally just there partially to show that Mr. Wormwood does at least kind of parent a little bit because he favors his son. And he does kind of try to teach him, like, one day you'll be a car salesman, son, so you should learn the trade. But all three of them kind of look down on Matilda, whose favorite pastimes are reading books and doing smart people things. So,
like taxes?
Yeah.
No, she doesn't do taxes.
That'd be crazy. So Matilda, since she's kind of left on her own a lot of the times, like her brother goes to school and then her dad goes to work and then her mom goes to play bingo, she realizes one day, oh, I could go to the library. So she goes to the library. She meets the librarian named Mrs. Phelps, who at first shows Matilda to the children's section, but then quickly realizes that Matilda has read through all of the books in the children's section, and so then introduces her to the more complicated fiction section that I guess would be normally shown to adults.
Quote, great literature.
Yes, great
unquote.
literature. And she's a voracious reader. She's always reading. When she realizes that she can check out books from the library, her mind is blown. She's like, I can read books at home also. But inevitably, she must go to school as well. So she goes to school. She goes to the aforementioned Crunchem Academy. All of the kids there are terrified of the headmistress, Miss Trunchbull. The older kids at school tell the younger kids horror stories about the chokey, which is this, like, torture contraption device that Miss Trunchbull uses.
It's like a closet that stabs the kids if they try to sit down.
Yeah, it's like a wooden box, and on 3 sides of the wall, there's glass shards, so you can't lean against any wall. And then the front door is also covered in nails, which she has hammered through the front of the door. So you have to stand perfectly still. Otherwise, you will knock against something sharp and hurt yourself. Really fun school. There is one ray of sunshine, though, which is Matilda's teacher is named Miss Honey, and she is everyone's favorite teacher. All the kids love her. She is a teacher who genuinely cares about the students. No other teachers are really mentioned in the book. They're just kind of other teachers who also fear Miss Trunchbull and also teach classes. But Miss Honey is the best of them. Miss Honey quickly learns on the first day of school that Matilda is extremely smart. She already knows all her multiplication tables. In fact, she can just do mental math in her head. And Matilda can also read full sentences. Then she realizes Matilda's actually read like Charles Dickens and all these other great literature novels. Miss Honey goes to Miss Trunchbull and is like, I think Matilda should jump like 10 grades. Miss Trunchbull is immediately like, no, I've heard about Matilda. Her father sold me a car and he told me that she's a horrible child and she's going to play tricks on me and etc. Miss Trunchbull's whole thing is that she thinks children are the scum of the earth. A lot of the kids play pranks on her. If she knows who they are, she will punish them. If she doesn't know who did it, she will just pick a random child to punish for the day. And that's her whole thing. Then the book goes into some of the various punishments that Miss Trunchbull like enacts on the kids. Sometimes she'll just go out to the playground and like pick up a child and throw them. Because Miss Trunchbull was a hammer thrower, like an Olympian hammer thrower. Yeah.
Like ball and chain.
And so she's like, this is my training. I have to keep throwing kids in order to stay in shape. There's a kid who stole a piece of her cake, and so she makes the kid eat an entire cake in front of the whole school. And she says that if he stops eating, if he refuses to stop eating, then she will throw him in the chokey. But he manages to do it, so it's very impressive. It's also horrifying.
He seems kind of happy about it at the end.
He was happy about it in the end, but I still remember like just how uncomfortable like that whole scene is. It was also very uncomfortable in the movie because like you're watching this poor child like stuff his face.
Oh, I imagine with a visual aid, it's terrible.
Meanwhile, Miss Honey has just decided, I'm going to try and help Matilda and get her some kind of education that is to her level. So she tries to talk to Matilda's parents. They don't believe her. She's like, Matilda could go to university early. And they're like, university is useless. And so then Miss Honey, the only thing she can do is she gets textbooks from some of the older kids' classes, and then she gives them to Matilda, and she's like, here's a geometry textbook. Just read this while I'm teaching the other students how to spell like cat. And if you have questions after class, you can ask me. So they've developed this really close teacher-student friendship. Then one day, Miss Trunchbull is harassing the children in class. Every Thursday after lunch, the kids know that Miss Trunchbull is going to show up and she's going to quiz them on what they learned that week. But it's really, she's like bullying them into like...
She's just bullying them.
She's just bullying them. But one of Matilda's friends, Lavender, puts a newt in her pitcher, which is still one of my favorite things that has happened in this series or in this book. And it's really great in the movie also that I watched. And Miss Trunchbull is like terrified of newts. She doesn't even know what a newt is. She's just like, what is this slimy crocodile creature? During that whole fiasco, she of course then just turns her anger on Matilda because she doesn't know who did it. So Matilda is just the closest person she can think of. And she accuses Matilda of putting the newt in her water. Matilda's like, I didn't do it. It's at this moment that Matilda realizes that she has some like telekinetic powers. And if she just focuses hard enough on something, it's described very well in the books. Essentially, there's like energy from her head that like she can focus with her eyes. She like tips over the glass and the newt falls on Miss Trunchbull and she screams and runs away. She confides in Miss Honey. Miss Honey kind of helps her like practice a little bit. Miss Honey also confides in Matilda about her backstory, and it turns out Miss Honey just lives in like a shack in the woods, essentially. Both her parents died when she was young, and she was raised by her very mean and scary aunt, who, after Miss Honey grew up and could become a teacher, said, well, you owe me for all the years that I spent money feeding and clothing you. So you have to give me all of your salary, and I will just give you like a little pocket change for the week. And so Miss Honey is, I mean, teachers already don't make that great of a salary, but she is especially...
She's destitute.
Yeah, has basically nothing to her name. It's revealed that Miss Honey's aunt is, surprise, surprise, Miss Trunchbull. So then Matilda takes it upon herself to rescue Miss Honey. She has this whole mission where she practices writing on a chalkboard. So the next week when Miss Trunchbull shows up for her weekly bully session, Matilda writes on the board and pretends to be Miss Honey's father, basically his ghost, and scares Miss Trunchbull away. The day is saved. Miss Honey gets her house and her fortune back. At the very end of the book, she adopts Matilda, mainly because her parents needed to run away to Spain because her father finally got caught for all his criminal activities, and they don't care about her anyway, so she begs them to just let her stay with Miss Honey, and they're like, whatever, it's one less mouth to feed. So that's the book.
Hooray!
Hooray!
I was like, oh, it's such a short book. And then as I was saying, I was like, oh, this is a really long summary. So
It's a short book, but it's tough to encapsulate. I think especially because compared to its various adaptations, the book is particularly episodic.
At the start of the book, you learn about Matilda's family and her love of reading. And then the next section is her encountering the school and Miss Trunchbull. And then it's Miss Honey and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Various sections, chapters based off of like kids' names.
Yeah.
I do like that sort of episodic style in novels. Not for every novel, but I think it's fun. I think it breaks things up.
Yeah. Especially if you're talking about like reading it to a young kid, perhaps as a bedtime story.
Yeah. Chapter by chapter.
Yeah.
That's true.
A little self-contained narrative with through lines throughout.
And it's nice not to have to describe every day of Matilda's life. You can just jump around.
Yeah. I will say, from the musical adaptation that I watched, I think they did some interesting things with like weaving in the various storylines, but it also makes it seem like a lot of things happen very quickly. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the book, it's like, okay, it took Matilda like a whole week to learn how to draw on the chalkboard. In the movie musical, it's more kind of like she just discovers how to do it. She always does it like out of necessity. Like it's always like fueled by like adrenaline. Like Miss Trunchbull is actively like hurting a child. I need to do something. That's kind of how it's portrayed. Whereas in the book, they spend more time kind of explaining or like theorizing why she might have these powers.
Yeah, the structure of the book was very interesting to me because a plot description, a short like on the sleeve of the book, or even like a description from the movie or the musical might paint this as a young girl with magic powers fights against her oppressive headmaster. But really, it's not. It's about a young girl who likes to read and her struggles being seen and heard for who she is, surrounded by adults who don't treat her well. And also, at the very end, she happens to get magic powers and fights her headmistress.
Yeah.
And she doesn't really fight her headmistress. She kind of just spooks her off.
Yeah.
The movie, I think, from what I know about the movie and the musical, it's almost like a revolution story. It's almost like she stands up for herself. She gathers the other kids around her and she leads them into a better future. And she's very much a take action, stand at the front, be loud sort of character. In the book, she's 5 and she plays lots of pranks on her father, and she eventually pranks Mrs. Trunchbull into fleeing the town, I guess. But she's not loud or boisterous. She's not a revolutionary leader. She's just trying to protect the people she likes.
Yeah.
Which is Miss Honey. She likes Miss Honey. That's the people she likes.
And she likes her best friend, Lavender.
Oh, yeah.
Lavender is the one who put the newt in the pitcher of water.
Sort of a betrayal, but also I completely understand that you don't want to step into the line of fire like that.
Yeah, essentially it's like Miss Trunchbull obviously like turns the blame on Matilda, and Lavender feels a little bad, but she's also like, I'm not getting away of that.
Yeah, I do recall the movie creating a moment where they actually share a couple lines, Matilda and Lavender, and it's clarified that there's no ill feelings behind them, and it's basically like a... In fact, they go the other way, because in the movie that I watched, they know, like, Matilda knows it was Lavender.
Oh, okay.
And Lavender says, thanks for not snitching on me. And Matilda's like, I'm not a narc.
Yeah. In those exact words.
In those exact words.
In the movie musical, Lavender actually has this newt all the time. Like, it's her pet. And then it's just one day they're in class and she realizes, I could use my pet newt for something very funny.
Oh, that poor newt.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
There's a good sense of camaraderie amongst the students. There's like an older girl named Hortensia who maybe comes across as a little bit of like a bully character.
You think she's going to pick on the girls, and then she
Yeah.
actually ends up giving them advice.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, you can tell, somewhat of like a scared tactic in a way, where it's just like, oh, you're new here? Let me tell you all this stuff to be afraid of.
Like, I think it's meant to be a scare tactic, but Matilda and Lavender, they both see it as a challenge. They're like, honestly, it's awesome that you like play all these pranks on Miss Trunchbull, and we kind of want to do that too. Like, Lavender is the only person that Matilda has told about her pranks on her father also. So like Lavender knows kind of this rebellious streak that Matilda has. I really enjoy their friendship.
Yeah.
How did you guys feel reading the book since you guys encountered the adaptations first?
The pacing of it was very unexpected to me. As I said before, it's very much a story about Matilda being oppressed rather than Matilda being a magic revolutionary, because most of the book is not really at school. Most of the book is her at home dealing with her horrible, horrible parents. And then there's a segment where she's at school and she learns she has his powers. But then there's another long segment where she visits Miss Honey's home and learns that she's in destitute poverty, living in this toxic little box and eating plain bread to survive, which is a terrifyingly relatable... No, I'm kidding. And it also felt a little bit, and I know this isn't true because I did look up how Roald Dahl wrote the book, and apparently there was a lot of revisions, but it does feel structured almost as if Roald Dahl wrote a chapter and went, oh, okay, nice. What's my next one about? I haven't thought that far ahead. Here's a chapter. Okay, nice. What's my next one about?
Yeah, it has that sort of improvisational quality.
It felt...
It's like an outline.
Yeah, it felt very familiar. And for a while, I couldn't tell why, but I think it's because this book was, I believe, I have no proof, all speculation, but I believe this book was insanely influential on a certain very popular Magic Boy British book, because the structure and the storytelling style and also many of the characters are very similar. And I'm shocked that I haven't come across this sort of comparison before.
I actually also have never considered that either.
Huh.
I mean, yeah, you guys see it, right?
Yeah.
As soon as you said it, I was like, oh yeah, like very similar like family dynamic where like your home life is very horrible, but then you have magic powers that allow you to change your life for the better in a way.
Even the writing style, like at first it's kind of like almost third person omniscient, like, oh, here's this character and her life sucks. Let me just describe her family really quick and her situation. And then we have, here's a small segment where she does a thing and things happen. Here's a small segment where she does a thing and things happen. Here's a small segment where she does a thing and things happen. And now we go to school.
Yeah.
And now she's magic. Right? That's just my 2 cents.
That is very interesting. I mean, I guess the broader works by Roald Dahl, I think of like James and the Giant Peach a little bit, and how that story starts with a poor boy besought with cruel authority figures at home in the form of some cruel ants or whatever, AUNTS. And then through magical means ends up going on some other adventure that takes him away from his cruel home life. Same thing with Matilda. Lives with a just real rotten family, and then I guess not through magical means, but with magic as a function in the story, ends up getting whisked away from those cruel parents, at least by the end of the book. And the Wormwoods, when they foist Matilda off, there's not really any closure there of any kind. In the Danny DeVito movie, there's an ounce of it. In the book, it's just kind of like, yeah, you keep her, and then they're gone. So there's a lot of...
Oh, what do they do in the movie? I'm curious.
It's, you should watch it.
I will.
There's a moment where it just kind of takes a bit of a longer beat as they kind of think about it. And Danny DeVito does the narration through various points in the movie, and he provides a little more pathos or gravitas in that moment because he's just kind of like, for the first moment, the Wormwoods probably did the one thing for Matilda that actually helped her. And Matilda's mom looks at her and says, "You're the only daughter I ever had, and I never understood you one bit." And then she's like, "Let me sign the papers."
I think they do a similar thing in the musical.
Which is nice.
Yeah.
And definitely more in line with the structured narrative.
In the book, they're just like, the feds are coming. We gotta go.
Yeah.
Leave the child.
I think they do endeavor a little bit in the movie to explain why Matilda's parents are the way they are. Just a little bit more. Obviously, they're still horrible, unsympathetic people. But, being a parent's hard.
Yeah. I mean, doesn't excuse you from not knowing.
Yeah. It's not an excuse, but I think they're trying to add in just a little bit more layers to these characters who in the book mainly have one personality trait, which is bad parent.
Dominant adult over some helpless child. I don't know. I read an article sort of about Roald Dahl, the legacy as both the author and the works of Roald Dahl, and the reason it seems to have such an impact as works for children. It sort of talked about the ways in which Roald Dahl's stories and how they captured the lens that children view or can view much of the world, where a lot of the things around them are titanic in nature, larger than life in ways that sort of maximize that feeling of being at the mercy of the world around you and seeing exaggeration in people and places and things, and how capturing that childish / childlike, because those are kind of two different things, capturing that perspective and then embellishing it with elements of strangeness, magic, or fantasy really connects with the young viewer and the younger perspective.
That makes a lot of sense because a lot of his characters are either very small or very big, and they're often changed sizes throughout the story.
Yeah.
The exaggeration of having to look up or look down at someone. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Interesting.
Even the drawings, too. When you look at the drawings in Matilda book,
She's
Matilda's
so small.
Matilda's tiny.
I love the drawings in this book. They're very nostalgic for me.
Hey, nice.
Yay.
We said the word.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I think there's not a whole lot of children's books that paint adults in this light either. Pretty much all of the adults in this book are just horrible. Even the librarian, who is someone who Matilda definitely admires or likes at least. Even then the narrator makes sure to comment on she sees what's happening to Matilda, but she doesn't feel like it's her place to intervene. So I also thought that was an interesting thing to note. There are horrible, mean adults like Miss Trunchbull. There are really nice adults like Miss Honey, but there's also adults in the middle who kind of just see bad things happening, but there's either not much they can do or they don't want to do anything about it.
They just don't believe it. I love the little bit of internal logic within the story, which is that the Trunchbull does such obscenely, wildly wicked things that for anyone to try and report them, for a child to tell their parent, it sounds unbelievable. So the parents don't believe them.
Or they're just too terrified of Miss Trunchbull to do anything about it either.
True.
Speaking of Miss Trunchbull, this is a question I had regarding the other adaptations. So in the movie musical adaptation, there's this whole story arc where Matilda is making up a story in her head about these two acrobats. Let me know if any of this rings a bell because I'm really curious. So in the movie musical, there's this whole framing story where every day after school, or sometimes before school, Matilda will go and tell Mrs. Phelps, the librarian, a story. In the movie musical, she's kind of like a traveling librarian, so she's kind of in different places at different times. Sometimes she's next to the school, sometimes she's by the lake. I think they're playing with the idea that Mrs. Phelps might also be a figment of Matilda's imagination,
Huh.
which is interesting. Matilda starts telling her the story. She's like, I have this like great idea in my head and I think I just need to tell it. So Mrs. Phelps is like, great, I love stories. I'll sit down, I'll listen. And every week Matilda will tell like another chapter of this story. So first it's about these two acrobats, or one of them is an acrobat and the other one is a escape artist, and they're married, so a lot of their acts like tie together, but they desperately want a child. But unfortunately, they have never been able to have a kid, no matter how much they wanted to. So in the end, they just kind of gave up and were like, it's not meant to be. They throw their lives into their work and then they start doing even more dangerous acts. They're like, it's just the two of us. We can't have kids. So why don't we just try and like do like crazier and crazier acts? So they get a lot of fame and popularity from doing all these stunts and pulling them off. Then it all leads up to the ultimate, most impressive act, which is, I don't even remember. It has like this whole complicated name.
This sounds familiar. I think this was a musical. Yeah.
Okay. But it's like the acrobat will like swing down and then the escape artist has to catch her before she falls into a pit of sharks. But then like the key, there's like this whole thing. I don't remember.
A convoluted Rube Goldberg machine.
Yeah. However, the day that they're supposed to do this great act that they've advertised for like months and months, a lot of people have come from all around the world to see this in person. They find out that the acrobat is pregnant. So like they're like, we did it. We made a kid. And then so suddenly they're like, we don't want to do this. Like, it's too risky. We like waited so long for this kid and now we're not going to put our lives at danger. But there's like a sister/sister-in-law who is like their talent manager. And so she's the one who's coordinated everything. She's like, you have to go through with it because I put so much money into this. Like, we advertise, like, these people paid tickets. If they ask for a refund, like, I'm going to have to give it back to them. So you have to go through and do it. But it does not go well. So already my memory is, like, spotty. But they managed to, like, pull it off, but someone gets injured. The acrobat still manages to give birth, but she dies during the childbirth process due to, like, other complications. The child grows up, but the father also is still like very sad over the death of his wife. At some point, he dies mysteriously out of sadness, heartbreak, or murder. So then the child is raised by her aunt. By the time this is all like finished, then it's revealed the child was Miss Honey and the sister is Miss Trunchbull. Because in the book, like Miss Honey's backstory is like, I just had regular parents and they died.
Yeah.
But they give like this whole backstory. And I think it was like in an effort to also give Miss Trunchbull more of a motivation for like why she like hates children / why she hates Miss Honey so much.
Interesting.
So I think it's meant to be like she like lost all this money and this career because her
family,
talent
got pregnant.
Yeah, essentially. It's kind of interesting because then it's like implied that Matilda has like beyond telekinetic abilities, she also kind of has telepathic abilities in a way.
Like she tapped into Miss Honey's story.
Backstory, yeah. In the scene where she goes to Miss Honey's house, Miss Honey's like telling her like, yes, so my father blah, blah, passed away. And then Matilda's like, your parents were the acrobat and the escape artist. And Miss Honey's like, how did you know that?
Okay, yeah. That definitely was not in the Danny DeVito movie.
Yeah.
Wow. That's... Listen. I used to be a musical theater kid, all right? I was in musical theater. I like musical theater. I like those things. But sometimes they just get so unhinged, these plays. I don't know if the Matilda story needed acrobat escape artists.
I think for like in a musical case, they get to do those cool sequences of like the acrobat and the escape artist and the circus and everything.
It's something about padding the story, but also trying to like give it layers and elevate it.
Yeah.
Adding musical sequences, adding plot where maybe it's a little thin in the book.
Very true.
Adjusting the story they want to tell, which is a musical revolution story about a magic girl.
Yeah.
It sounds very compelling because I'll admit I was sitting here with rapt attention listening to you tell the story about the acrobats. My added context from all of these different Matilda iterations affects it in various ways, but it's independently, at the very least, Yeah, that's a musical backstory for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, definitely.
Two acrobats who could not get pregnant, and so they committed themselves to performing ever greater and greater feats until one was pregnant, and then they committed the greatest feat, and one died in childbirth, and the other died of a broken heart, or was he poisoned? And it was all the backstory of the characters in our musical. Yeah, that's a musical subplot for sure.
I find it very funny that a Broadway musical, very visual, very stylized, would choose acrobat and escape artist, whereas many movies choose screenwriter. You write what you know.
Yeah.
A trend, perhaps? That distinction is very true. What you say, June, especially about the musicals trying to tell a story about a magical revolution girl.
Mm-hmm.
In comparison to the book, definitely she sounds a lot more proactive in that musical. I don't know if you would agree, Victoria, or if it's just like there's more in there.
It's little ways like the cake scene. Matilda is the one who gets everyone cheering for the boy.
Yeah.
Instead of just the crowd
And she
cheers.
becomes known in the school for being this like upstart child.
Anti-establishment.
Yeah. Oh, there's like a scene in the musical where one of the kids is about to get in trouble, so she tells everyone to take off their jackets and throw them over him so that they hide him. And then when Miss Trunchbull walks out and is like, I know this kid, like, I forgot what he did, put a stink bomb under my desk or whatnot. Then Matilda is like, but he's been asleep under this pile of clothes this whole time. How could he have done it? So she comes up with like a lot more of these ideas. Whereas in the book, Miss Trunchbull bullies a lot of children and Matilda doesn't do much about it because it's like she's only 5.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot she can do.
Aging up the characters definitely gives them more agency too.
I mean, she's still pretty young, but like probably like 6 or 7. They say that like her parents should have enrolled her in school earlier, but because they're bad parents, they didn't. Is her brother in the Danny DeVito movie?
In the Danny DeVito movie, he's more of a antagonizing character.
Ooh, okay. He's just not in the musical whatsoever.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I can see the extraction of that.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't do much in the book to begin with.
Yeah.
So,
like y'all were saying, he's just along for the ride.
Yeah.
This poor kid.
I also think in the movie musical, it's more obvious that Matilda is the one pranking her parents. Like, she actively hands the hat to her dad instead of, like, him just, like, grabbing it on his own after she's put the glue on. It definitely still captured the essence of the story for me.
It definitely sounds like, whether it's the musical or movie musical or Danny DeVito movie, there are changes made. I think it sounds like very effective changes, taking a lot of these various story elements that are in the book but disconnected from each other in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Whether they're independent scenes or independent pieces of information, and merging them into a more cohesive standard narrative that we would expect from a self-contained piece of like passive content, passive media, like a movie or a musical. What comes to mind, for example, in the book, we get these following pieces of information as independent info drops. 1, the Trunchbull has a thing called the chokey, which is a little torture coffin that she places children in when she doesn't like them. 2, she bought a car from Mr. Wormwood, Matilda's dad. Those are like 2 independent pieces of information. In the movie, for example, Miss Trunchbull buying the car from Matilda's father is what prompts Matilda's father to put Matilda into Miss Trunchbull's academy. I don't remember this in the book. Maybe I'm inventing disconnections where there were actually connections. Miss Trunchbull's car breaks down, the one that she buys from Mr. Wormwood, understandably because he sells junk cars. When it breaks down, she turns on Matilda because she takes her anger out on the kids. She takes her anger out on Matilda and throws Matilda in the chokey as a direct result of that. I'm not sure if Matilda ever actually goes in the chokey at all in the book.
I don't think so.
Or
No,
if we
she
see
doesn't,
any
yeah.
kid really go in the chokey. We're just told about kids being thrown in the
actually,
chokey.
because in the, like, for example, the cake eating scene, in the
Yeah.
book, he succeeds and Miss Trunchbull just, like, leaves in, like, a huff. In the musical movie, he succeeds and then Miss Trunchbull is like, you're still going in the chokey, which is just...
Classic.
Yeah. But yeah, no one actively goes in the book. Maybe it's a little too much to, like, actually see the torture.
I think it's just another consequence of this sort of episodic, disconnected nature of the book storytelling,
Yeah.
where you have these like, oh yeah, she's a closet where she throws kids. Oh yeah, this kid ate a cake. Oh yeah, She bought a car from Matilda's dad, but they're not like necessarily connected. It's all just building the atmosphere, the legend of Matilda. These are all small parts that sort of escalate into magic powers and fake ghosts.
It's interesting thinking back on like all of those separate scenes and plot points. It's the same feeling that I don't know if you all feel the same way, but it's the same feeling I get when I think back on like a given year of elementary or middle school. You can pick out certain chunks of time within the year, but you don't necessarily know how they all string together.
It feels accurate to how a kid experiences life.
Yeah.
Here's my school chunk. Here's my home chunk. My weekend chunk.
That's true, yeah.
My magic powers chunk.
Whereas an adult, it all just blends together. Here's my January chunk. Here's my March chunk. Where did February go? No! I swear it was just here. I was looking forward to February. Now it's April.
Oh, ain't that the truth? That's the Miss Honey reality.
Oh, I remembered Miss Honey. I did not realize she was 23.
Yeah, she's real young.
A very
younger
young,
than us.
a very young person, fresh out of school, living in destitute poverty, eating one meal a day.
So like any young person.
Sure, yeah. I think we mentioned before we started recording, but trauma dumping on a small child,
Yeah.
which is, don't do that. But also, Miss Honey's been through a lot.
Yeah.
She's never had someone who she can confide in whatsoever because she grew up with Miss Trunchbull, who probably has never offered her any emotional support in her life. And then she wasn't even allowed to go to university elsewhere. So she's never really been able to leave this small village.
Yeah, no one her age to talk to.
Yeah. And so she finally meets this like wonderful little child who's
Yeah.
really smart. And she's like, I guess I'll tell you my life story.
I'm fairly certain when she's trauma dumping, there is a little aside where she goes, this is a lot to tell a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
But she's magic. She's magic, so she'll get it.
I did find something I highlighted that did make me laugh. This is when Matilda is telling Miss Honey all the books that she's read. And Miss Honey says, tell me one that you liked. And Matilda says, I like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I think Mr. C.S. Lewis is a very good writer, but he has one failing. There are no funny bits in his books.
Shade.
Although, then she says the same thing about Tolkien.
Yeah.
And I'd argue that's incorrect. I think Tolkien knew humor.
Yeah.
The Hobbit's funny. The first couple of chapters of The Fellowship of the Ring are funny. And then there's just a lot of descriptions about elf politics. But,
Yeah.
you know, there's a couple of jokes in there.
Oh my
The
God,
Hobbits are funny.
I just thought that was also amusing because we just read Narnia and talked about Narnia.
Well, we just read. To you,
Quote, unquote.
dear listener, we just read Narnia. For us, it's been
Eons.
That was not planned. That was amazing.
Michael and I sometimes will just share the same brain cell at the same time. It's very amusing.
They keep having to pass the brain cell between the
Yeah.
offices.
I also thought that the writing in the book was a lot more blunt than I remembered.
Yeah.
Because the last time I read this, I was probably in maybe middle school. Maybe I reread it once in high school, but it's been a while. Even though I remember the plot points, I didn't remember necessarily the writing style. But honestly, he doesn't really pull any punches. He uses some like very graphic, descriptive language.
It's aggressive.
Yeah.
It feels like he's sitting a kid down and he's saying, look, kid, here's the story of Matilda. And you're going to get all of it.
Yeah.
I'm not going
I'm not going to
dodge
sugarcoat
around.
anything.
Yeah, you're going to get the story. Her dad sucked. And it feels like respecting that the kid's going to get it.
Yeah.
Respecting that the kid can take it. Because the world is cruel and you need to understand that
Yeah,
now.
yeah. That's true.
So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I haven't read enough, but I can't pretend to know this. At least in like British kids' books, is like bluntness an aspect, and then American kids' books are more like, woo.
I don't know.
I think
don't
it just
necessarily
really depends on
think
the
so.
genre.
Yeah. I think part of that is just Roald Dahl.
Yeah, I think that's just his style.
And his influence, maybe.
Yeah.
Did we stumble upon something?
Yeah. I don't know. I guess we have to read more British children's books and also American children's books to compare.
Not a problem, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, now that you bring it up, isn't that How to Train Your Dragon?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like Matilda is blunt in like a different way than How to Train Your Dragon, though.
Yeah.
Because maybe it's also because of the genre, though, because like How to Train Your Dragon is like they're Vikings and they're fighting dragons. So it kind of makes sense for there to be like violent and graphic imagery.
But even in the prose, like if we're taking things from Hiccup's perspective, who tends
Yeah.
to be more erudite, there's still a certain level of, there's a wryness to it.
Yeah.
I recall where it's a bit of a tangent here, but like describing in How to Train Your Dragon, like a flower braving the cold, desolate winds to sprout in early spring and immediately getting like decimated by the winds and just completely annihilated. And the personification of the flower and of nature in that moment speaks to a bit of like, I guess, flowery prose.
I wonder if it's just... Well, it could be an escalation of this sort of influence, because I'm sure Roald Dahl is very influential, and I'm sure that How to Train Your Dragon took some inspiration, or at least, the author did.
It's hard to imagine that any children's books don't have some amount of inspiration from, I guess what we could say, like, major figures in the history of, like, children's book creation.
I don't know. It just feels very British to me.
Yeah.
To sit the kid down and say, here are the facts. It's not pretty.
Yeah.
It's kind of gross. Is that funny? Do you like gross?
I will say something that How to Train Your Dragon and Matilda have in common is their descriptions of characters are really strong.
Yeah.
So I just pulled up one of my favorite descriptors, which is of the cook at the school. And this is how she's described. The cook, a tall, shriveled female who looked as though all of her body juices had been dried out of her long ago in a hot oven.
Great.
Yeah.
In the musical, is there a cook?
Not as a character. There's just like cafeteria ladies who like wheel out a giant cake.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the Danny DeVito movie, there is the cook.
Oh.
And she looks exactly like the book
Nice.
description.
Perfect.
Perfect casting.
Big ups to Danny DeVito.
They really went in on it. She
Yeah.
even gets a couple lines in there.
Wow.
Yeah.
The cook she's kind of like Miss Trunchbull's personal chef in a way. Because it's like all the kids get their like generic school lunches. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're
MREs.
But Miss Trunchbull gets her like morning cake, her morning chocolate cake from her personal collection. And it's the cook's personal recipe and blah, blah, blah.
That feels true to life for
Yeah.
school children. What are we eating? And why are they eating that?
Yeah.
Give me some of that.
The feeling of severe oppression. What's in the teacher's lounge? I bet it's amazing.
Slightly unrelated, but I'm wondering if this is a universal experience of the teacher bringing a Tupperware of salad and then like mixing it around during lunch. And the kids are like, I got a question. She's like, I'm eating my salad. It smells.
A lot.
It smells like a lot. My salad. Did you have that? Did you ever experience that?
I think I have that experience.
Like an elementary school teacher with her salad, and this is their only time.
Even
her
a high
time.
school teacher.
High school teacher, yeah.
Sure.
This is their only me time.
Yeah.
And it's during lunch, and they've got their salad, and the kids are like, "Oh, teacher, please!" And then the teacher's like, "No."
I'm going to be honest, I don't think I ever talked to my teachers during lunch.
Victoria had it all on lock. Victoria
Victoria's
didn't need to
cool.
talk to her teachers.
Victoria's a jock.
Quite the opposite. My gosh.
A jock of the academic
Yeah.
world.
Honestly, I don't think I ever talked to my teachers outside of class very often. Except in high school. Like in high school, like the teachers had office hours that you could go and like ask them questions. So like sometimes
Oh,
I would
wow.
go. But usually in
Wait,
like
office hours when? Between classes?
sometimes it was like on certain days, like they'd maybe stay after school a little bit longer.
Oh.
And their office hours would be then, or sometimes it'd be during lunch. Or well, like in high school, like some kids have like off periods, so it wouldn't be unusual for a teacher to also have like a similar off period where they would say like, hey, if you also happen to have this hour off, I'm going to be at my desk. So feel free to come by and sit down.
Whoa, off periods during school?
Yeah, we
That
had off
happens.
periods.
Or wait, like the kids had off periods. Whoa.
Whoa.
I mean, I've heard.
The legends are true.
I've heard of it, but
I think
didn't
we are only allowed to have like max like 1 or 2 off periods a semester.
Is that
like a
Did you
week,
say
I think?
high school or
In high school, yeah.
Okay, I think I had that in high school. Yeah.
For most people, it was almost like an extended lunch. So like I would often try to like have my off period like after lunch.
Yeah.
So that instead of like the half-hour lunch or whatnot, you got like a full like hour and a half.
You
Wow.
know
Which was
what?
pretty sick.
I think I had that in like my senior year.
Mm,
It was pretty dope.
yeah.
I was a nerd, so I stayed at school and made stuff on the computer. But
I mean, like
anyway,
most of the time, I would use my off period to do homework, so that I wouldn't have to do it later that day.
Dang. I wish I had off periods. If we wanted one-on-one time with a teacher for help, we just have to go to them and beg, like, please, stay after school, please. And they'd be like, no, I have a life. No, they were nice. They were cool.
Yeah, I will say, Gino, in case you're imagining like it's a universal off period, it was just a scheduling thing. Depending on how many classes you had gone through and your requirements to graduate.
Or like some classes would be like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then like maybe you wouldn't have a Tuesday, Thursday class, so then you got that hour off.
So your teachers could still be teaching a class. You'd just be like, well, I guess I'm hanging out.
You know what? We didn't have off periods, but a memory just came to me that I'm not sure is real because it seems too far-fetched to be real. But I think we had nap time in high school.
In high school?
That sounds amazing. I would kill
Which is a
for
very
nap time.
Montessori thing to do.
Yeah.
I'm fairly certain, and I don't know why I never remembered this until now, but it must have happened. I remember just like all the lights would turn off and kids would just like spread out wherever they could and then just like nap or read. I just like but they'd have to be quiet. They'd have to shut up. And like sometimes if you were lucky, you could like, and you got permission, you could like work on a group project or something. But like,
wow.
Yeah, we had nap time.
Was that like in a single, like whatever classroom you were in, or was there a communal space of silent, quiet teenage bodies?
It's like the whole school, all three houses, all three suburban houses. Well, 2 suburban houses and 1 questionable warehouse.
So
would just
suburban
shut down.
Houses?
You know this.
Wait, no.
I thought it was just a warehouse.
Yeah, you
Well,
told
no,
us
there
it was like a disused factory and it was like a larger building, right?
Well, there was the warehouse, and then there were just like 2 houses. Like 2 houses someone might live in.
Victoria and I are looking at each other like...
I thought I told you.
What?
I went to school in a couple houses in like a big warehouse without a ceiling that had like eye cleansing machines in them. The whole campus would just shut down. They turn all the lights off, and then like the teachers would relax for half an hour, and all the kids would just nap. And it was like supposed to like help our brains reset or something, like some study about teenagers.
I would have killed for a nap hour in high school.
I don't know why I didn't remember it until now, but I think we had nap time.
Wow.
Which I will gladly take over a free period now that I'm saying it. I win!
Yay!
Yeah, certainly seems much better than having your poor beleaguered teacher invite you to her shack in the woods and dump all her trauma on you and be like, I'm sorry, I've just been alone since I was born.
The description of Miss Honey's house as like a tunnel, the hallways are like a tunnel, and then the sitting room is just a blank, empty closet with like boxes on the center for sitting.
Yeah, when Matilda was like, so how do you take a bath? And Miss Honey was like, oh, I don't take a bath. I draw water and then I just like rinse myself like with a towel.
She doesn't have a bed. She just lies out on the floor.
Yeah, she lies on the floor.
It's so tragic.
It's so tragic.
And she's so sweet.
In the movie, like she at least has like a bed, and then she's also put drawings that students have made for her on the walls, which is cute.
Sweet.
The book description pulls no punches. They're like, she lives in a shack. There's no running water, not even like a bathroom or anything.
Her kitchen is like a box with a stove on it.
Yeah.
Like a small portable stove.
Wow. And all she can afford is bread and margarine.
It's crazy to me that even in the book, she didn't like decorate, or at least try to. Like she just goes home and then makes a small cup of tea and then places herself horizontal and closes her eyes.
Minimalist icon, Miss Honey.
I think for Miss Honey, just having this space all to herself away from Miss Trunchbull was like a victory enough.
That's true.
And it's also like she can't afford to like really decorate that much.
I mean, you can scratch pictures onto the wall.
Yeah. But like
I don't know.
Because like she grew up in this home with her horribly abusive aunt, technically like if she wanted to, she could have stayed living there and then she would have a little bit more money. She would have enough to like at least eat decently a week, but she chose to instead put that money towards renting this shack so that she doesn't have to be in that environment.
Okay, so like a lot of these scenes in the book, there's scenes that are in the play or the movie, but they're much compressed in the play or the movie because they're moving the plot along. In the book, they'll just go on for quite a long time, longer than perhaps a script doctor or whatever would consider necessary.
Yeah, just describing the pain that Miss Honey goes through every day.
Yeah.
Just going on and on and on.
So when Miss Honey describes her experience, she really goes into much more detail about how being raised by Miss Trunchbull, how losing her parents at a young age affected her psychologically. And is explaining to Matilda, this poor 5-year-old girl who may be intelligent but is not necessarily wise, Miss Honey, doesn't have context, explaining to her like you have to understand how like absolutely devoid of personal respect and ego that I had. Like I was not a full person, and the sheer triumph alone of after living under Trunchbull's thumb for so long and feeling like my responsibilities were not to myself but of making Miss Trunchbull's life better, just the sheer amount of like willpower alone that it took to say, I'm moving out and finding this place in the woods on some farmer's estate and living here is like the most revolutionary thing I've ever done in my life. And so there's like, even though she's got like a box for a table and sleeps on the floor, it's like...
It's better than what was before.
Incredibly so.
And
it's
it's
aspirational.
Free. Yeah.
And this is, I suppose, one thing that I can say, like, I definitely like that aspect of the book, and it's deeply tragic and sad, but, you know... There's plenty of like darkness in children's books, especially the Roald Dahl ones. In the Danny DeVito movie, yes, she has like a place that is like small and out of the way, but so much of that movie is like very beautiful and like a lot of blooming light and the lenses and everything. And Miss Honey's living conditions are probably, out of all the various adaptations of Matilda, the best in the Danny DeVito movie.
It's made to look almost quaint.
Yes, it's like cottagecore.
Yeah.
Oh,
where it should be boxcore.
Boxcore.
Should be asbestos core.
Alley core.
No.
So that is something that like really registered, I suppose, for an older audience in the book, is this idea of the amount of trauma Miss Honey has to a young reader isn't something they're really going to be able to pick up on.
Yeah.
But an older reader, I would say, probably is a better idea.
Yeah, like 20 years of your life, you've just been at the beck and call of this
abusive monster.
And you don't have money. You can't go and like run away. You just have to like grin and bear it.
Stiff upper lip, as the Brits say.
Yeah.
And then eventually maybe you'll find your way.
I think I like how they did it in the movie musical, where it's like, it's not a great shack,
but you can tell she's on the
you can tell like
path.
she's like made it her own, which I think they captured that essence better of like, she finally has a space that's her own and she can like decorate it and make it livable for herself. But in the book, it's just like, no, she just lives here.
Yeah.
Also, another thing I liked in the movie musical that they kind of made sure to like carve out a little bit of time for is when Miss Honey gets her home back, like her father's home. There's a moment where like she walks up and you can see like she doesn't know how she feels about it actually, because all of her memories of this place are horribly negative, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so just because it's like, hooray, Miss Trunchbull's gone and like you can not live in a shack anymore, it doesn't mean that all of that trauma is gone. But then it's nice in the movie, like Matilda comes up and like holds her hand and they walk into the house together, and it's kind of like we will make this like a happy
Our
place
home.
for us. Yeah. I was always happy that she ends up with Miss Honey at the end.
Yeah.
I just love Matilda. I related to Matilda a lot as a kid, not because my home life was horrible, but just because like her love of reading. I was like, yes, I also like reading.
Would you say that's why you like read it as many times as you did? Just like how much you identified with Matilda?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I always like looked back fondly on it of like, yeah, Matilda, she's great. She loves reading. She loves books just like me.
What a smart move from a marketing perspective. I'll write this book about a child who loves to read, and that way all the kids who love to read will read my book about a kid who loves to read. That's a lovely thing. And I'm so glad that we've read this for Nostalgia Club, especially because having like an older perspective versus our younger selves, we get that full range of... It's the Matilda experience and the Miss Honey experience.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's like, wow, we are like older than Miss Honey. So we've basically like experienced...
Oh, dear.
I could not imagine being Miss Honey.
Yeah, no. Like, if Matilda's experience is the, like, hyperbole of the childhood experience, Miss Honey's is, not for everyone, of course, but for some adults, the hyperbole of the adult experience.
Or at least this generation.
Yeah.
If we're feeling ready to wrap up, I do want to give a quick shout out to the illustrator, Quentin Blake,
Ooh.
who did 18 of Roald Dahl's books, also like 300 books overall.
Wow.
I mean, the drawings are really great.
Yeah.
I
And they
still
seem
remember
iconic,
them.
right?
Yeah.
Like every picture I remember as if I had read it yesterday.
Big ups to Quentin Blake
Big
Yeah.
ups.
and Danny DeVito.
My favorite drawing is the one where Matilda runs up to Miss Honey when she's gardening to tell her, like, my family's moving away.
Oh, yeah.
That one I remember very well. Like, it's just also, like, any shot that's of Miss Honey with, like, this tiny, small Matilda child is very cute.
Adorable.
Yeah. I'm really glad we got to revisit Matilda.
Yeah, what a wonderful little book
Yeah.
about a wonderful little girl. and a bunch of ass.
Oh, well, until next time.
Go to your local library.
Yeah, literally, though.
Until next time, have some cake. Have some more cake. Eat the cake, child.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to Nostalgia Club. If you enjoyed this episode, follow us on Twitter @_Nostalgia Club and on Instagram @Nostalgia Club Podcast. Leave a comment, give us a rating, and subscribe. You can also send us an email with your suggestions for what we should review next at nostalgiaclubpodcast@gmail.com.